It is my great pleasure now to introduce our moderator, Steve Seidel. It's been a long day. I'm getting tongue-tied. Steve Seidel holds the Bauman and Bryant Chair in Arts in Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He was, from 2000 to December of 2008, the director of Project Zero, which I think many people in this room know about. He has been the director of the Arts in Education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education since July of 2004. And where is he? There he is. He's coming up here. And he's going to lead us now for the rest of the afternoon.
That's great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. Maybe later we'll talk. I'm not from Ohio. I'm the okay. Maybe by the end of today I will be, but I haven't yet. So listen, today's conversation is, as Nanette said, part of a series of conversations taking place across the country under the auspices of the Lincoln Center Institute. That's the educational arm of all of the artistic organizations under the umbrella of Lincoln Center. The purpose of these conversations is to try to draw public attention to the role of the imagination in contemporary life and work, and in the creation of healthy communities and societies. Indeed, I don't know how one ever achieves and sustains healthy communities without powerful imaginations at work. Maxine Greene, who for decades has been the philosopher in residence at Lincoln Center Institute, writes of the imagination as that human capacity to look at the world and to see it as if it could be otherwise. Without imagination, as Maxine Greene implies, it would be impossible to ever make things better. And certainly we live in a nation in which there's a great deal to improve. So our goal today is to reflect on the productive, generative uses of the imagination, and we couldn't have better company for this and better provocateurs for our reflection. 5 people who have done very distinguished work in 5 very different fields. I know that you have much more detailed introductory material on each of these folks, so I'm just going to say a tiny bit to draw forth the range of perspectives and experience, the wealth of experience we have here today. Dr. Tim Berra is Professor Emeritus of Evolution, Ecology, and Organismal Biology at The Ohio State University. He received his PhD in biology from Tulane University. He's a 3-time, this is incredibly unusual, I'm not sure anyone else has done this, a 3-time recipient of Fulbright fellowships, in this case to Australia in '69, '79, and 2009. And his latest book, Charles Darwin, The Concise Story of an Extraordinary Man, was published in 2009. Chris Coburn has served as executive director of Cleveland Clinic Innovations since it was established in May 2000. He has built a high-performing team of nearly 36 professionals guided by some of the nation's top venture capitalists. In June 2010, Innovations was recognized by Global Corporate Venturing as one of the world's top 30 health corporate venturing organizations. Antoine Quentin Fisher was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and is a director, screenwriter, author, and film producer. His 2001 autobiographical book, Finding Fish, is a New York Times bestseller. The 2002 motion picture, Antoine Fisher, was written and co-produced by Mr. Fisher and directed by Denzel Washington. Mr. Fisher still works as a director, author, poet, lecturer, college professor, movie producer, and screenwriter. Althea Harper is a fashion designer and entrepreneur who manages her own fashion line, Althea Harper. Ms. Harper is considered one of the breakthrough designers in today's fashion industry. Her designs have won the attention of many people, including many Project Runway fans, including several of my students at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, who, upon hearing that I was moderating a panel on which Ms. Harper is a panelist, suddenly to think much more of me. Michael Weiss. Michael is President and Chief Executive Officer of Express, a privately held, dual-gender fashion brand that has been in business for nearly 30 years. Mr. Weiss came back to Express in July of 2007 after 3 years of retirement. Under his leadership, the Express brand has experienced unprecedented growth, expanding into new categories and new channels of distribution, including its first international franchise partnership in the Middle East. So, as promised, and in the tradition of the imagination conversations around the country, I think that Nanette and Cindy and company here have gathered a truly diverse set of perspectives through which we can look at and think through the role of imagination in our modern lives. So I hope that in listening to these panelists, we will all be provoked, in the best sense, to reflect on the uses of our imaginations in our own lives and the ways we might encourage and support nurturing the imaginations of young people in our schools and communities. I'm going to pose 3 questions to the panelists today. The first is how they use their imaginations in their work lives. The second has to do with the education of their imaginations and their teachers. And the third is one about museums and imagination. After the first 2 questions, we'll take time, we'll open up some space and invite you all to ask them questions and to hear some of your own thoughts. And then we'll wrap up. Sound okay? Please come on up. So, good afternoon. It's great to have you all here. So, what I thought we would do is have each of them speak. We're going to start with Althea, go to Antoine, Chris, Michael, and then Tim. The first question I would like you to just share a little bit of thought about is what's the nature of your work? So we have that from your perspective. We know in general what you do, but what you consider kind of the critical nature of your work. And what are 1 or 2 ways that you use your imagination in your work?
Okay, well, I'm a fashion designer, and so what I do is, I'm a sportswear designer, so there's different type of fashion, like with the couture and the more gowns, it's extremely imaginative, but sportswear is not necessarily sports as far as like athletic, but pretty much what we're all wearing today would be under the classification of sportswear. And so what I do is take what we are wearing now and how can I make that creative in the years to come, but it's a bit more challenging than just kind of doing like couture where you can kind of go crazy because you have to realize like, you're not going to totally wear something completely different tomorrow than what you'd wear today. So it's a way of making kind of baby steps and finding out ways to push the limits, but in a way that people would be comfortable with. And so I would, that's kind of where I focus my creativity is by looking what I have today and you look at, what are people wearing and, what do I think they're going to be wearing tomorrow and how can I push that and how can I, put in what I feel would be great for people to wear. And that's kind of how I use that creativity into the design.
Great. So already a theme which may emerge, it'll be interesting, of working with constraints, pushing limits, and having to connect with people.
Absolutely.
As you do it. Antoine, would you share with us?
Yes. I'm a screenwriter and an author, but basically I really enjoy writing screenplays and directing movies. Producing is not so much. But the same imagination I had as a child that helped me through my difficult times, I find that imagination useful in my work that I do. Everything, I don't know if people consider that everything, if you go to the movies or watch a television show, everything that you see, everything that you hear, the type of car you might see, the clothes that they have on, if they turn to the left or right, a writer has to write that. It's really a daunting job to do. And a lot of people strike out to be screenwriters, but without an imagination. You have to actually see how I write is that I actually see the scene unfold in my mind, and I write on paper what I see as I create it in my mind. I teach at UCLA, and some of the students, it's really surprising that somewhere along their life, they lost their imagination, or they don't know how to hook into pretending. They feel that pretending is juvenile, it's for children. And if you want to be a writer, you have to be able to tap into the child that you were, the teenager, the young adult, your entire life, because you're going to create characters from across the whole lifetime. And so if there's 15 people in a movie, you have to create each of them and give them each of them their own voice. And you have to give each of them their own style. And you have to keep all of this straight. No character can sound like the other. So if you have 15 people in a movie, you have to remember how everybody speaks. So you have to have an imagination and really be sharp with it in order to keep it organized. And I'm required to do all this in a month.
Great, fantastic. Chris?
Well, first I just want to thank CMA, Annette and Cindy for organizing this. And you think about this topic, creativity and innovation, there's few things that society values more than innovation. You see it everywhere. In what I do at Cleveland Clinic, we have a chance to work with truly some brilliant scientists and physicians. But that said, there's so little understanding about the nature of creativity. We just put on our own forum about a month ago on creativity in science. And again, you think about this, Francis referenced the goals for economic growth for the country and the state. So it's something we all embrace, but take a look at the literature on creativity in science. Maybe you have. There's very, very little. We look at these folks who we've provided so much education to, whether they're a physician or possibly an MD, PhD, who may have 14, 18 years of postgraduate education and training, and then we look to them and say, okay, we want this extra element of output from you, yet we never discuss it with them as a student, at least as an adult student. And then I would argue that at least the folks I'm working with were in K through 12 20, 30, 40 years ago, and I think reflect that system. So in terms of our work, I think we kind of exist at the boundary of clinical practice, discovery science, and commercial application. It's kind of an interesting area. There's very little form to it in a sense. I mean, not many people get trained coming through school to do what we do. So I find it to be an activity that demands a lot of creativity and resourcefulness, and in a sense rewards that as well. So in terms of my daily work, I think it affords a maximum opportunity for doing things in a new way, and it provides a reward for that. So I find it very, I think the whole theme are very rewarding for me as an individual.
But part of what you're suggesting here is that, at least in your field, there's the word gets used a lot. The words, creativity, imagination, innovation. But as your comments made clear, there's a lack of clarity and precision about what we mean by these, and really in many ways a lack of literature about it.
Well, yeah, lack of real study. You look at the budget for the National Institutes of Health is $28 billion a year. I think the average taxpayer, the average member of Congress, supports that, one, to have a greater understanding of disease, but specifically because they expect some new therapies, some new diagnostics to come out of that. So that's the given. And here we make this huge, huge societal investment. Okay, and that's as it should be. You know, obviously, we've as individuals and as a country, we've derived great returns from those investments. But that said, we do virtually nothing to equip those people to perform in this way. They can certainly, from a standpoint of certification and exercise of a profession, we do a lot of that. But this other side, I would argue, at least in our work, it's hard to see any systematic effort to try to drive that.
Great. And I hear at least an echo of the question that Antoine raised, which is what's happened to the imaginations of his students at UCLA.
I just close my thing by saying I get a chance to talk to a lot of the incoming physicians, and I always ask them the same question: how many people in this room think that they're innovative? We could even do it here. And it's interesting to me, less than half will raise their hand. And I work at an institution that draws innovative people into our organization. And it's almost inconceivable for me that you would have all this training and this Darwin, if you will, process that delivers them to that room that day, and you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. You wouldn't think on a daily, maybe an hourly basis of a better way to do it. But if your imagination, your sense of exploration has been somehow or another tamped down, maybe you're too removed from it.
Great. Michael?
Sure. I'm a retailer. That's the business I'm in, but more specifically, I'm in the fashion retailing business. I think that when we speak about imagination and innovation, we've left out the third level, which is imitation, right? So that all three, I think, apply to creativity. I think there are very creative imitators in the world, but I think the basis of our particular business is innovation. And when I think about innovation in the fashion business, I think about really reimagining things. Because when you think about what is pure imagination, somebody had to imagine a carriage that didn't need a horse. Somebody had to imagine that. But somebody also had to imagine a Lamborghini. So in my view of it, the Lamborghini is reimagining the horseless carriage. So, and I think that in the fashion business, the true creativity is reimagining things. And we do that all the time. What we particularly do is we think about a lot of things. And it's a cliche, you can't do it unless you dream it. And and I think cliches are cliches because they're so true. And they sound trite, but they're true. You can't do it unless you dream it. In the retail business, there's the business aspect of it, and there are very creative thoughts about the business aspect of it. There's reimagining the Agora in ancient Greece. It's now the mall. There's a connection. There's a connection in all things, and I think we have to acknowledge that connection and figure out the next step. I think, I forget which hockey player ever said it, but the job of a hockey player is to figure out where the puck is going to be. That's our job.
Wayne Gretzky.
Gretzky, thank you.
Thank you. Want to make sure the recording captures Wayne Gretzky. It's the
I want to give
attribution
credit where credit is due.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. So, again, I'm hearing some themes emerging. I connect your comment, Michael, about the need in your business or in any setting to encourage dreaming as being very connected, really, to what Antoine was talking about in terms of his teaching and what Chris was talking about, trying to work at the particular nexus of this intersection that he's working at. Let's turn to Tim. So what's going to happen right now is a very unrehearsed but elaborate piece of choreography as when 5 of us leave the stage and move the chairs, and Tim is going to show you some visuals. And then we'll all come back up and continue on, and then we'll open it up for questions. Oops. Perfect.
Well, good afternoon, fellow primates. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about imagination. This will be, as Monty Python might say, now for something a little different. I think that knowledge is the raw material of imagination. You're not going to have imagination working if it has nothing to work on. And one way of getting a lot of knowledge is to do what my most beloved professor told me once in graduate school. Joseph Ewan, Tulane University, said, "Tim, soak yourself in facts. Read, read, read. That's the best advice I can give." And related to that, Louis Pasteur indicated that chance favors the prepared mind. Things are going to happen. How are you going to deal with them? You're going to be asked to solve problems. If you don't know anything, you're not going to solve the problems. You're not going to be able to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves at your feet. And I'm going to use my career in ichthyology, which is the study of fish, to show you how perhaps I've been creative. I never thought about being creative or imaginative until I got the call saying, "Do you want to be on this panel?" I mean, truly, I don't sit around saying, "Geez, I got to be creative at 4 o'clock. What am I going to do?" It just happens. I was in Western Australia studying this bizarre little fish down here called the salamander fish. It's only about 2 inches long. Nobody knew anything about it. It lives in the southwest corner of Western Australia, nowhere else in the universe. And we didn't know beans about it. It lives in these isolated pools of very black acid, really low pH water. It got there by flooding from river systems all around. The water and the fish got in. Here's a pool at ground level. I had 22 of these stations set up, and this is more or less full of water. But during the heat of the summer, which in the southern hemisphere, of course, is December, January, February, the water evaporates. That's the same pool, no water. Well, where are the fish? Fish have to live in water. Their gills have to be immersed. How can you have fish but no water? That was my problem. Well, how do I deal with that? Well, the first thing that occurred to me is, they don't fly out of the pool. They must burrow down into the sand. So we started digging. And, oh my God, there's got to be a better way to do this. I mean, talk about looking for a needle in a haystack. But I actually did dig up a few fish, sifting the sand. They were in the bottom of my sieve. Well, okay, but I want more than one every 8 hours. So I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I brought a fire truck out into the field and released water into a dry pool. Hey, that might work. And being Australia, there are lots of bushfires everywhere, and the little towns nearby, they all have bushfire fighting trucks. So I went to the village and said, "Hey, can I borrow your fire truck?" And they thought, well, this is weird. These Yanks are, they'll do anything. And they lent them to me. Typical civil service operation in Australia. One guy's holding the hose and 6 others are standing around. So we released 2,700 liters of water into this totally dry pool. And I thought, okay, turned off the valve. I'm going to drag my net now. This will be time 0. And then I'll drag the net, say, every half hour to see how long does it take for these fish to come up, if indeed that's where they are. So there's the pool with the water in it. As soon as I pulled my net, I caught 7 fish immediately. And I did this at 2 stations, Station 3, Station 6. I was running back and forth 10 minutes, 90 minutes. Here's 4.5 hours. I had caught 43 fish and 27 fish. This is truly instant fish. Just add water. Well, while I was studying this 2-inch fish, this thing washed up on the beach south of Perth. And I was at the WA Museum, the Western Australian Museum, where I was research associate. And call came into the museum saying, hey, we got this big thing up on the beach. Do you guys want it? I said, well, what is it? And they said, well, I don't know. Last night we pushed it out to sea, but it came back. And it might be a whale. So I went down there and had a look. Here's where chance favors the prepared mind. I recognized it immediately. It was the 3rd known specimen of megamouth shark. There had only been 2 ever seen before. First one in 1976 was tangled in a U.S. Navy sea anchor in Hawaii. Raised the sea anchor, and this shark was all wrapped up in it. 8 years later, a fisherman off coast California had a megamouth shark in his net. So I was aware, I'd read the papers, I knew such a fish existed, but here I had the 3rd one at my feet. Now what? What do you do with something that big? It was a male, 790 kilograms, that's 1,500 pounds. Over 5 meters long, that's over 15 feet long. When it was first caught, it was described not only as a new species, Megachasma pelagios. Mega means big, chasm as in opening, pelagic meaning open ocean. It was not only a new species, it was a new genus and a new family of fishes. 15-foot long shark that we knew nothing about until 1976. And here I had the 3rd one. So first thing, I got to get it back to the museum. Well, how do you do that? Well, there are a lot of gawkers standing around, so I liberated some reinforcing wire from a building site and made a little sand ramp and got these people to push and shove, and we got the shark on there. The beach crew that was cleaning up the seaweed had this front end loader, so they lifted the shark up, allowed me to borrow their truck, and we laid the shark in there. I called ahead to the museum and said, you're not going to believe what I've got. And I need a place to put it. And so the director of the museum got a hold of a seafood company, and they said, well, we can use their frozen storage locker for a limited time and so forth. Drove it back to the museum, and it was amazing to watch the publicity unfold. Somebody, took a picture, reported, got in the news, started getting calls across Australia, from Sydney and Melbourne, and then New Zealand, and then California, and then New York, and then London. Everybody wanted to know about this thing that washed up in Perth. There was such a clamor at the museum that we had to put it on display 4 days later, and in this shaded courtyard between these 2 buildings of the museum, here are people lined up the street and down the hill and up to 6,000 people filed through this in the 4 hours that we made it available. Here he is, still frozen. There's the wire is still there. He's frozen to it. You can see why it's called megamouth. Feeds on plankton. It's harmless, but still, nobody knew of this thing. Well, most of the fish I work with fit very conveniently in half-gallon jars. There's no directions that come with it. How do you pickle something this big? Well, after drawing a bunch of schemes on napkins during tea time and so forth, it came up with the plan. We'll dig a coffin-shaped pit in some sandy soil on property owned by the museum. We made it coffin shaped so that we could conserve preservative, but yet have a broad enough space for the pectoral fins, a narrow space for the caudal fins. Got some shade cloth from a greenhouse, cut out the holes for the fins, stitched in loops at the top, scrounged a rail from a junkyard, that swimming pool liner that is holding the fluid in. We just made it up as we went along. I had to inject it with formalin, so I built a hypodermic needle out of a meter-long piece of stainless steel tubing, 1 centimeter in diameter, sharpened the one end of it and attached the other end to a push-up garden sprayer, and filled it with formalin and put it in the abdomen and just kept doing this until it was leaking formalin. Then we knew it was filled up. Then we put it into the pit, and the only thing, I had no budget, no budget to do this, but we had to beg, borrow, or steal 8 44-gallon drums of formalin and a backhoe to lift the thing up. I couldn't leave a big pit of formalin open. That would be very bad PR if a small child or a dog fell in it. So working on the assumption that it's much easier to get forgiveness than permission, I took the gates off the property and laid them over the top of the hole. And then building sites are very useful places to get equipment. We found some roofing insulation, put that over the gates, held it down with the sand that we had taken out of the hole. And would you believe that shark stayed perfectly preserved for 8 years? It stayed in the hole for 8 years. The museum, as is typical of most museums, didn't have enough money. It couldn't raise money. We had to make a big drive and this and that. 8 years later, the museum has this wonderful display, again, in a pit in the ground. Dug a hole, nice fiberglass tank, fancy bottom. There are lights in there and a glass top. And there's our megamouth today, preserved beautifully. There's a lot more to this, but now, today, we know of 40 of these things that have come up. Never saw it before until 1976. We don't know everything that lives in the sea. Here's mine, the first one, Hawaii, second one, California, but most of them now have come up in the Eastern Pacific, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, so forth. Now, this brings us to the fish I'm currently studying. This is the last one and going to be the most interesting, I think. This is the nursery fish. The males carry the eggs on a hook on their head. Nobody had studied this thing. The previous, most recent report was 1914. It lives in northern Australia and southern New Guinea. That's one of the reasons nobody studied it. My study area is here. You can't get there from here, believe me. That's the Adelaide River. I've also chased it all the way up the Fly River years ago, but another story. Here's a typical day at the office. I'm in my 4.5-meter aluminum boat, and 5-meter crocodiles are all over the place. And these are saltwater crocodiles, and they leap, they jump, as you can see. And there's a jumping crocodile tour that comes right through my study area, and they... Whoa. Come on, there we go. I'm right there when this is happening. If they wanted in my boat, there'd be no stopping them. If you whack the chicken on the water, that draws the crocs from all over the place. Look how high he gets. That's a 5-meter croc. Now this 6-footer, look at, he's almost completely out of the water. So it's pretty exciting working in the Adelaide River. Well, I wanted to study the anatomy, so I borrowed some techniques from the medical profession. At the time I was doing this, I could have dissected it, but I'd make a mess out of it. There's no way. Look at how delicate the the supporting bones are and so forth. I wanted to study the swim bladder, which we've colored in red here on the computer. The lobes of the swim bladder fit beautifully in the concavities of the ribs, and the ribs are so bizarre. No fish has ribs like this. It's like a bony cocoon around the swim bladder. So again, using the CAT scan technology, which is a lot easier than this remote. See, we can take out the bones, rotate the swim bladder, turn it around, look at the dorsal and ventral sides. I mean, this is really cool. And I didn't have to dissect it. Museums don't like you dissecting their specimens. They're supposed to be there in perpetuity, undamaged. So this was a great tool. I don't know why people didn't use this before, but since I've been giving presentations on this, I noticed at my scientific meetings, the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists, or Ichs and Herps as we call ourselves, there's a lot more zoologists now using this technique. Here we're going to go from the left side of the fish right through it and come out the right side. There's the otolith, our ear stone on the left. There's the central vertebral column. There's the right otolith. And we get all the way through. Of course, I can stop this at any point and study the bones and so forth. It's a terrific tool, and it was just a matter of using it. I always get homesick when I look at the Adelaide River. I got to get back as soon as possible. Imagination. Don't leave home without it. Thank you.
Come on, invite you back up. Thank you so much, Tim, for that tour, both of your work, but also of the ways in which you use your imagination in creative problem solving. That's fantastic. So let me note that Tim started by quoting his teacher. I forget the name. Who was your teacher?
Professor Joseph Ewan.
Professor Joseph Ewan.
Botanist.
Who was catalytic to you in terms of understanding the relationship between knowledge and imagination. So I want to come back and ask a question about teachers and imagination. One of the questions that I think hangs over the whole enterprise of imagination is whether it's something that can be, even the language that we would use, be nurtured, mentored, taught, etc. So I'd like to ask if there's, and we'll start with Michael this time, but is there anyone you've known as a kind of formal teacher or mentor in your life who really nurtured or helped develop your imagination?
Well, actually, yeah. If you look at my biography, I was with the Limited Brands for a very long time. And just a little update, we're no longer a private company, we're a public company, which was a good thing, okay? I think that when I got to the Limited in about the very end of 1980, I was exposed to the idea of imagination as being an essential part of business. And that, of course, came from Les Wexner, who has run that business. He established that business. And we talked about imagination a lot, and we talked about innovation a lot. And we talked about imitation, actually, a lot. And aside from that, we talked about the imaginative part of the business end of it, not just the creative end of it. And we would have lots of conversations that were called blue sky thinking. You know, can trees grow to the sky? How big can things be? Imagine how to get them there. So yes, he was a real influence on my imagination in business.
Michael, can I just ask you, how long did you work with him?
Well, until I retired, which was in 2004. And
so
then
this was 20-some years.
Yeah, 20-something years.
So this apprenticeship in the use of imagination in business was a long affair.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that when you work someplace a long time or when you do something for a long time, anything evolves. If it doesn't, you should stop doing it because you're going to probably fail. I mean, if there's one essential thing in our business, it's that things have got to change. So that you can't establish a rule because you got to know that whatever that is this year is going to be a little different. The idea is to figure out different how.
Great. Okay, so that imperative of change was really a theme of your comments as in introducing us today. So, Chris, what do you think when you think about this question?
Yeah, we had obviously talked a little bit ahead of time. That's an interesting question for me. I guess I would say two things. One, one of the great joys of what I do is I get to work with so many creative and motivated people, remarkably talented. But you think about imagination, again, the conversation we'd had earlier, and at least watching them in action, it's an unwillingness to accept whatever is the first or the second or the third answer, and to keep relentlessly moving forward to a point of a breakthrough. So that's a lesson I think I learned throughout my academic progression, to see that expressed in so many different ways. Specifically from an individual standpoint, and my colleague Roz Strickland is here, probably our best known inventor, and we like to refer to him as the innovator in chief, is our CEO, who has 31 issued patents and is a world-regarded cardiac surgeon. And watching him as an innovator, as an inventor, is kind of an interesting thing. He always likes to note the inventions that were made by making an association between two otherwise unrelated things. So probably the best known invention he has is an annuloplasty ring to restore the geometry, the annulus of the heart valve, to get it to work better. And he got that idea by watching, I don't know if it was his wife or his sister, do needlepoint. And the way the fabric was stretched over the frame helped him make the link between that concept. And at least on the device side, you look at the folks who, I have a chance to work with. It's frequently it's making that otherwise unexplored association between two different things.
Great, beautiful. Antoine.
Well, yes. When I was growing up, of course, I had a lot of challenges. So I would always use my imagination as a way to escape. But when I started school, I went to Oliver Wendell Holmes. And I had a teacher named Miss Prophet. And in the 5th grade, we started going to museums and the Cleveland Orchestra. We went to see at Carnegie Hall, I think it is. And I had never been in that kind of environment where you see paintings and it was explained to us that there were people who actually put all the color on there and created that whole thing. And of course, through their imagination, some of them didn't have a subject. They created the scene from their mind. And the whole idea, I didn't connect that to what I had been doing before I started school until later on. I remember my teacher, Ms. Prophet, took us to see the Cleveland Orchestra play. And in the beginning, it was so noisy. To me, I'd never heard classical music before. I listened to soul music, right? So I had never heard classical music. And it seemed like really noisy in the beginning. And then when the main guy came out, I thought he was the main guy. He went in front and he held up his baton, and everybody got real quiet. And I thought it was pretty orderly. And then when it started, it was so beautiful. And I had never heard anything like that, so organized. And as I was listening to it, I thought that what sounded like a lot of noise, I could actually hear the different instruments. And in my mind, I imagined sitting next to the cello player. And I moved around, and then I heard a triangle. I wrote about this in my book. And with my imagination, I had an opportunity to be a part of that music. And I got to be a part of the painter that I saw at the Cleveland Art Museum. And all those things, the Auto Museum in Cleveland, where there are all these beautiful cars, and as a little boy, you walk around and they're showing you all these shiny cars, and someone had to imagine that. Like Mr. Weiss said, somebody had to come up with the idea. And so I did not understand that it was possible that I could do something as big as that. But as I grew up, of course, and you write movies and you go to the theater, and the theater is full of people, and you hear that all over the United States there are people sitting in the theater watching this movie that you wrote, that you sat in a little room with a computer and came up with all these words and thoughts, and the car came around the corner and smashed into the wall, and then you see it happen. And it's like you never want to lose your imagination. And it has been a magic carpet for me my entire life. And because of Miss Prophet, she really kind of steered our imagination. I had this teacher for the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th grade, so I had a chance to be with the same person the entire time. And as a result, I still know her. But I can never say enough about teachers and their ability to touch your life, and you'll never forget them, and everything they ever taught you, you keep some of it with you.
Althea.
Well, I would say I would completely agree with you in that you need to have the tools to be creative. You need to first have the basis, so you have, things to reference on to create those ideas, because you have to learn what has already happened, so you can build on that. But that said, I also, when I was younger, in 3rd grade, I was a horrible speller, and I guess that's 5th grade, and even my 3rd grade teacher was like, kind of telling my parents, Althea's just average, or, I was kind of always just like, didn't do especially well in school, kind of was a subpar student. And then this teacher told me, because I was horrible at spelling, so when I'd write, I'd hit a block because I couldn't spell that word, so it was like, okay, I don't know what else to write, you kind of just stop. But what she would say was, she was like, just don't be afraid of the mistakes, write, and then learn how to fix them. So first be creative and push those boundaries, and then you can go back and, there's a dictionary. You can, there's tools that can help you spell. And I feel like that was a major breakthrough for me, because, later in college when I was doing sewing classes and whatnot, they would say, Althea, you don't do that collar. First, learn the collar's not in the book. So can you I like your jacket idea. It's a good idea, but it's not in the book. And I was like, you know what? I don't care. I know how to sew. I know the basics of sewing. And so I'm going to make up this collar and I'm going to do it. And that was all based on just having that one teacher believe in me when I was in 5th grade and saying, I kind of was like, don't be scared. If you make mistakes, that's fine. You have the tools to correct it, and not even correct it, but to build on it and make it something that's substantial. And I feel like, just have the courage to go ahead and do that. And I think that that's something that teachers should be able to do for those kids, because there are a lot of kids who I think are scared, and maybe they are kind of like in this in-between zone. And like you were saying, that teacher that gave you that opportunity to go to the music, and kind of let you envision yourself in that, being able to do that. And so taking away that aspect of fear and comfort, I think, is a huge thing. And then also, something that my mom always said was, if there's a will, there's a way. And, being a business owner now, and I, not having a ton of funds, and when you're doing the fish things, and, you kind of having no budget and finding these ways, that's something that I always tell myself when I'm working. And, putting on a fashion show up against, in Fashion Week, I'm going against companies that have, oh my God, 100,000 times bigger budgets than I have to produce the show, but I still have to get covered by the same media outlets. And so what can I do with what I have to make it work? And so first what I do is, start with the idea and then figure out the way to get there. And I would say that would be, from being both my mom and then that teacher again in 5th grade, with just the idea of first think of the big picture, and then you can figure out how to get there. You can get those tools to get where you need to go.
Fantastic. So this part of what this is, all of your comments are making me do is reflect on the question, and the question I think has the problem of part of the problem of a lot of conversation about imagination, which is that it's trying to isolate something that exists in conjunction with so many other things. Courage, that you named, relentless drive, that Chris named, being in not just having a single teacher, but also living in a community and being in an environment in which people, whether it's a work environment or a social environment, in which people are constantly pushing themselves to break through, toward breakthrough and to solve problems that have previously daunted them. So I love the way that your comments are opening up the question and revealing the narrowness, in a sense, of the question, which I thought prior to this evening was a perfectly reasonable and good question, or I wouldn't have posed it. Let's open up now and see if there are comments and questions. I don't know if there are microphones, but are there comments and questions? And let's, as soon as we've answered the microphone question, or maybe, and that will only be a second. There was a comment over there, and then a comment here. We'll get to yours. Could you raise your hand in over there? Oh my God. Yes.
Ohio Bill. Hey, Antoine and I want to know, is that a Columbus thing? Because it's not like that in Cleveland.
It's not like or anywhere else.
Okay. I think we have a question. Could you stand up?
Sure. I was just thinking that one example of creativity is just problem solving. And clearly the problem in this room today is phones. And so I was thinking, it's not that difficult to turn them off, but I'm thinking, why don't they just, in a building like this, where people are going to have phones or theaters, why don't they make something that just mounts on the ceiling and it cuts off the signal to all phones? Just don't let the human element even come into play. We make somebody millions of dollars. That's true.
I think there's an easier way and more creative.
What's that, Michael?
Because that would take a very long time. I think the more creative way would be to find the phone and dump it in the water and face the music.
I'll offer my own. I apologize for not doing this, but I've taken in public settings like this to starting with exercise. You ask everyone to reach very high up, stretch, and then reach right down into their pocket or their pocketbook and find their phone and pull it out and take care of it, and we'd all do it together at once and hope that it's done. I'm sure there are many other solutions to this problem. Unfortunately, we didn't think of them before the phones were ringing. There was another thought there. Or yes?
Okay, it is on. I've been an educator for 32 years and also a school librarian, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of Francis's group with creativity and innovation. And as a teacher who's been teaching since like the 70s, I've seen so many things change, but it seems like what we don't listen to a lot of times is what the students want and how to make things more personal for them. I believe that there are certain processes that can be taught. I think that everybody has their own way of coming to creativity, but I believe that from just listening and seeing the PowerPoint, there were some commonalities in what everyone was talking about, that, you know, you have a problem or you have an opportunity of something to be solved. You start to do wondering and wandering, which we don't have enough time to do in schools today. You use resources and people around you to help solve the problem. And in schools, we are in buildings and silos, and the teacher next door to each other, next door to each other, doesn't get to talk to each other. Some people have more resources, some people have less resources. As Althea has said, you need to be a bit risky, you need to be able to fail, and we're not allowed to do that in the education system. It seems like it's getting tighter and tighter as far as that's concerned, and you borrow from other fields. So those are just some of the things that I think that need to be addressed. There needs to be a safety net for students and teachers to do some of these things and to create and not expect something immediately. So that's my thought.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if anyone has a reflection on that comment or not. I don't know.
I think she was well spoken. I think she made some good points.
Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts or questions? Yes, we said we'd get to you. Hold on a second.
I think a very basic need of all human beings is reinforcement for their actions. And once you've discovered that you can be creative, then what is the major reinforcer to continue that? Is it internal? Is it external? Is it a combination of both?
Any thoughts? Chris?
I don't know if you're looking at me, but I guess there's two answers to that question. One is for the student, the primary or secondary school student, in what reinforcement looks like for them. I'm obviously living in the world of adult creative types.
And I'm sorry, I meant to preface that with saying as an adult.
Yeah, thank you. So I can talk about the second one a little bit better than the first. But I think on the second one, at least in the communities that I'm part of, I would say probably three things. People are driven, at least in the medical community, are driven towards innovation typically because they're seeing an unmet need. And they commit themselves to pursue that. Sometimes it may be years in a laboratory and truly fundamental science. Other times it can be a very quick addressing of an issue in an operating room. But they're drawn it to that for that reason. I think the second thing is peer recognition and the satisfaction of seeing your work expressed and helping people is important. And I don't know if this is a good thing to talk about with educators, but a monetary return is a real incentive. You look at the great inventors, the people we think of the great inventors. Frequently, there's huge monetary successes that go along with those inventions.
I would say, for me, it's very internal because not everyone's gonna react to what you do. And so, as a designer, sometimes you're gonna put out collections that maybe people aren't gonna respond to as much, but there has to be something inside you that says, this is great, maybe people aren't jumping on the bandwagon now, but give it a few seasons, and there has to be that, you can't always, the external, that is great. I feel like that's like the icing on the cake. But I feel like for me, it's about the internal because you're going to hear no a lot more than you're going to hear yes. And so being able to take that no and still believe in yourself and push it, and then eventually, I always think success sometimes comes to the last person standing. And who can take, because eventually, if you believe in what you do enough, you're going to find people who will, there's a lot of people in the world, and if you keep going, eventually you'll find someone who responds to what you're doing.
I would very much agree with that. I really would. I think it all depends on the level at which you expect things. People with just pure imaginations. Van Gogh never sold a painting. Imagine that. Or I think he sold 3, something like that. They don't really gauge their work by acceptance. I think innovators look for acceptance. They really do. I think one of the ways that you get acceptance is commercial viability. You don't always get that. So I think different people are motivated by different things.
For me, the reinforcement is accomplishment. You apply your creativity and solve a problem. You got the job done. You figured out that this in my case, this fish goes up and down with the rainfall and burrows down into the damp sand and stays moist and takes oxygen from the water that's in the sand. Or you've figured out what it eats or when it spawns. You've learned something. You've accomplished something. And to me, that's self-rewarding. I mean, it's self-reinforcement.
I'm sorry, could you stand and,
Yes.
and
I've always believed in creating spaces for people to potentiate themselves. And, I've been in the private equity business, and I was chairman of CAPA and chairman of the Columbus Foundation. And I think to have creativity and imagination, you need purpose. And, so I wanted you all to reflect on that for a minute. And also, I think, I'm 65 years old, so I'm thinking about the third stage of my life. And how do I grow younger as I grow older? And so that's all about work and play and making your work more playful, which is a little bit what Anton said about connecting to your child. I think it's so important to do that. But Michael, would you answer the question on purpose? Do you think purpose engenders creativity?
Absolutely. I think you have to have a goal in order to acknowledge what the road is to that goal. And I think the creativity part is the road. I mean, how are you going to get to something that you decided you want to get to, which is the purpose? I 100% agree with you. In terms of the third stage of your life, can I make a suggestion? I hope you've developed old age skills. I didn't have a one. So I went back to work. But that's neither here nor there. I think purpose really does count because it gives form. It gives absolute form to creativity. Wow. There it goes again. Unbelievable, isn't it?
It's a plan.
I'm not sure it's actually in this room. This has been a problem all day, I think. There's with whatever. Perhaps there's time for one more question or comment. Do we know where it's coming? Its microphone is coming to you.
Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone on the panel would connect creativity to purposelessness.
Say it.
I would wonder if anyone on the panel would connect creativity to purposelessness.
Purposelessness. Ooh.
I'm willing to. Did you want to go first? Go
Just
ahead.
one
Cheers.
sentence.
Cheers.
I think there are people with sort of faux creativity who cite their creativity as a cause of their purposelessness. I don't think real creativity ever leads to purposelessness.
I'll come at it exactly the opposite way. I'd never met any of these panelists before, 10 minutes before we came out here, but being around them seemed familiar to me because creative people, at least in my view of individuals, there's kind of a common thread. And what I see on this panelist and what I see in my work is people who are available and open to whatever it is that they're going to do. And I think sometimes purposelessness is, a description of not being free from whatever is pressing on you and depriving you of the ability to be open to an idea or, as I said earlier, an association. I wouldn't want to have to strive for that state, but there is a lot of, there's been discussion over decades, centuries, about what's the state of greatest creativity. And I don't know if some people here know the story, but I think it was Edison used to fall asleep with ball bearings in his hand deliberately and have a metal pot there that they would fall into after he finally fell asleep because he believed that stage of between wakefulness and sleep was the most creative, and he wanted to get himself there. So I don't know. I think that might be what you're getting at, but the world that's dominated by excess caffeine intake and short-term deliverables, I think, frequently deprive people of the chance for creativity, in my view of the world.
I've met a lot of, myself and a lot of artists that, for example, I'm a designer, so I spend majority of my time, designing garments. However, I like to draw all sorts of things. Sometimes I like to write, and then I have friends who are artists, and he collects old ships and puts them together. And I mean, little things like that, and you would never. It's kind of like it's another creative outlet, but sometimes those things then in turn do assist you. I mean, I always rely on those things when I'm stuck. So if I have to get this inspiration, I have deadlines to come out, then that's kind of when I fall back on my old sort of purposelessness creativities, and the fact I like Japanese anime a little bit, and sometimes I'll just draw it, and then I'm stuck, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to use these illustrations I have, and I needed to put a collection together very quickly, and it becomes a purpose, but that wasn't the goal.
As a biologist, I'd like to see this problem looked at scientifically. For example, why not do functional MRIs on a variety of people and those that you have already identified as creative? Are there different neural pathways that are active? Are these pathways mediated by certain neural transmitters? What are they? Can you enhance that? This might be a whole other mechanistic way of getting at something that's sort of ethereal. I mean, if you can imagine it, you can study it.
Actually, I think that work is being done.
And in fact, all of us are hooked up to electrodes right now. I want to be careful about time. I did want to ask the panelists one more question. I also want to acknowledge that at least the last two questions have really raised, I think, some very powerful issues, not only about the relationship between purpose and creativity and imagination, but just what is the meaning of purpose. What serves as a powerful purpose for me may seem to someone else quite silly, purposelessness. So there are a lot of interesting ramifications in these issues. We're in a museum that is growing and expanding, both in its physical space, but also in its understanding of itself and what its role in connection with its community might be. And I want to say, on my first day here at the museum, that I am excited by what's happening here, and I applaud what's happening here, because I think you're really, in a very creative way, rethinking what museums can be. The question that I would like to just pose a kind of last thought question to the panelists and ask them to just share, if they've got a thought, a quick kind of parting thought, because you all are about to walk out into the museum, and that is, in your experience, how does time in museums connect to the nurturing, growth, development of your own imaginative capacities? Antoine actually spoke about some of this, but do you want to add anything?
Well, of course, museums were a part of my early life, and now I'm a father, and my wife and I, we take our children to the museums in Los Angeles because it's a quiet place. They always have materials out for the kids to work with, and I think that I got so much from it. I just want them to be able to feel what I felt as a kid. It's a lot of freedom there when you take into account that all the work that you see was done through someone's imagination, someone's hard work, and it wasn't just like when I paint, because I use watercolors, it's just for whatever, but someone was devoted to painting and devoted to sculpting, and explaining to my kids that some of this is this person's whole life they put into this. And you could see their lives unfold in the work that they did at the Getty Museum where we go. And so, yeah.
Great. Anyone else want to share a thought? Any order?
Sure. I think in very, very many ways in terms of our business, from very mundane ways to, excuse me, to much more abstract ways. The basic advantage is developing taste, because in our business you have to have taste. And taste is taste. It's not necessarily clothing taste or furniture taste or painting taste, but going through a museum is very important towards that development. If a friend of mine were going to be buying their first painting, I would suggest that they go spend an hour in any museum, and then I would almost guarantee that they would not come home from purchasing their first painting with a clown on black velvet, because they will have discovered in that museum that that's really not good taste, even if they didn't know it before. In very mundane ways, we have seasons. We look at things, we look at colors. I mean, if we foresee a bright color season, we'd be crazy not either go to a museum or open up a book and look at Matisse for color combinations. Look at any fauve for color combinations. I think when you go through a museum, you understand how reimagination happens in fashion design. There's a lot of conversation about retro in our business, and it really never happens. Maybe an item happens, but nothing ever comes back the way it was. But when you go in a museum, you can see how clothing is reimagined by very talented designers. And I could go on with this, but it's really invaluable. I mean, we all, without being fashion historians, we look at certain nodal things that happened in fashion in a century, one of which was Christian Dior's new look, right? Changed the way women all over the world looked. No, I take it back. All over the Western world looked. I'm being chauvinistic. You go to a museum, you go to the Frick, and you look at Fragonard and Boucher, and those are the clothes reimagined. Here's something that we think of as so modern and innovative, and it was, because it was a tremendously wonderful reimagination of 18th century clothing. So yes, the answer is yes, in case I didn't say that.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Just to expand on that, I mean, there's no better place to go if you need to jumpstart your inspiration, because you can look at, as Anton was saying, one piece of art is someone's whole life. So take from that one piece of art, you can create a whole collection based on one piece, and then here you are at this museum that has rooms upon rooms upon rooms of more of this work, and also just as far as new ideas, and I always go back and reference the old, and so at the Met, I always love going into the armory room, and you see all the armor, and I also like how it contours the body. What is it protecting? What parts are they kind of not protecting, and how are they adding their decorative? Where is their culture coming into that? And then just taking, that's from one country's. I mean, you could do a collection on each country in that room of their different, armors that they had. So I mean, that's the place that I always go when I'm, lost and need something. But or even when you don't, the best time is when you're not lost and you're not desperate for some inspiration. You just go and kind of soak it all in and sketch and keep it in the back of your mind. But I think that, what people respond to and what makes, there has to be some base on something that was, solid, that was there before, and to go back and, whether it be armor, whether it be a painting or whether it be a sculpture, there's so much to take from that to expand on and to create something new, and not just clothing, but in all different art forms.
Great. Chris or Tim? Yeah.
Let me add that I think the general public has a very limited understanding of what it is that museums, and I would add zoos into that too, that museums and zoos actually do. Most people think they go to a museum or a zoo to look at a specimen of something, a painting, an animal, stuffed animal or a live animal, and that's it. What they don't realize that's about 1/3 of the job of museum people. The others, the education is sort of the obvious job, but there's also research and service. The museum people are the ones out there on expeditions, in the case of natural history museums, collecting this frog or that bird or this earthworm or whatever, exploring, cataloging things from different parts of the world and doing research on it. They're creating new knowledge. It's not just that they're making exhibits to hang in the museum. And the third thing they do is service. People bring things in and want to know what it is. Or they will ask a question, why can't the fisheries of this species be open for more activity? And it may be the museum person that goes out and studies the population and so forth. Or if you're paying a top dollar for a fillet of Chilean sea bass, and you're actually being sold a piece of carp, who's gonna tell you that? Well, it could be the museum person, the curator who does the DNA analysis and said, this is not Chilean sea bass. So museums are a lot more than places to go to look at things.
I think he said a key word yeah. I think the use of the word curator is very, very important, because I think when you go to a museum and you see a well-curated exhibition, what you come to really understand is aesthetic point of view, telling stories, which is so very, very, very important in our business. So I get that as well.
So maybe play a little bit off of the prior comments, but try to come at it slightly differently. I think a point we were talking about earlier in the session, I think museums are a place that can shift perspective and put people in the right frame for creativity, one. And then two, I think Mike and Althea both said this, I think there's the education of being in a museum to see, if it's art, by definition, it's the byproduct of an act of creation, or creativity. So that instruction that one gains from being exposed firsthand and trying to understand that, if it's a painting, it was a blank canvas at one point, and what brought that piece of art into being. So I would argue that there are few places in society that are as accessible and have the potential impact on promoting creativity that a museum would. It's a place and it's a tool.
Beautiful. Okay, so I am going to resist every internal urge that I have to try to say something that will kind of sum up and capture everything that has been said here, because I know that if I take one step in that direction, it will be 9:30 before I finish, and I will not have done a very good job. But I will not hesitate at all to ask you to join me in thanking these wonderful panelists.